Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining. This is Hendrix Baden. I would like to welcome you to our Thursday webinar featuring our customer, San Joaquin County, and their PeopleSoft security challenges to provide mobile access to their PeopleSoft systems. I'm joined by our customer, Kaz Kumar, who will introduce himself. I'm also joined by a couple of colleagues. What I thought I would do is a brief agenda, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kaz. But just some meeting management really quickly, some webinar management. All attendees are in listen-only mode. However, we absolutely encourage this to be as interactive as you would like it to be. Your GoToWebinar client has a question component. And if you have questions, please feel free to write those questions into that box, send them to us, and then we'll either interrupt on a real-time basis or we'll save the questions for last. For any questions that we don't get to or that you all might have that you think of after the session, please let us know and we'll reach out to you directly. In terms of an agenda, I've already done the introduction. I'm now going to turn it over to Kaz to tell the San Joaquin story. Then I'll get back on the line and I'll just give you a peek into the success that we've had in the public sector to show that I think we understand some of the challenges and issues that public sector customers face. And that's public sector government across all aspects, and I'll show that. Once we're done with that, then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Greg Wendt. Greg is the Executive Director of our Security Solutions Group. He really runs the strategy for the security platform, and he comes from a really deep PeopleSoft and security background. Greg was actually a customer of ours for a number of years, implemented and ran the security platform, and then we'll save time at the end for Q&A. We're recording this session and we'll make a link to the recording available to everybody that has attended today. And so, Kaz, I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter, and you can take it from there.
Okay, well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone can see my screen at this point. This is Kaz Kermis. Great. Yeah, my name is Kaz Kermis, and I'm an Information Systems Manager here with the Information Systems Division of San Joaquin County. And with me, I have Jeff Chan. He's an Information Systems Analyst working on PeopleSoft, and does a lot of the work around the security area. Say hello, Jeff.
Hi, everyone.
So what we'll do, we'll talk a little. I wanted to kind of give you a little background on San Joaquin County first, because I know there's people from all across the country, and I've found in other areas people aren't really sure where San Joaquin is. So San Joaquin County is out here in the central part of the Central Valley in Northern California. The major cities are like Stockton, Lodi, and Tracy, and we're actually within the San Jose, San Francisco, Oakland statistical area, and we're just east of the San Francisco Bay Area, just separated by a few mountains, and it does get a lot hotter out here than in the Bay. So that's one of the things we have to deal with out here. And we're the 15th largest county within the state of California. The Information Systems Division, where me and Jeff work, we provide all the information processing services, support, and coordination for all the county departments. And our mission is to support the technology solutions that create opportunities to transform the way service is brought to the public and within the county itself in leading, integrating, partnering, educating, consulting, and supporting. So our PeopleSoft environment, we've been a PeopleSoft customer since 2002. We're on Finance and HR 9.2, and the People Tools version is 85527. And one of the initiatives that we have on PeopleSoft is really to enhance the security within PeopleSoft. And this is critical as we're moving towards deploying mobile access to PeopleSoft, which we've got some functionality out there and looking at doing more. So in order to enhance the security within PeopleSoft, there's a few areas that we absolutely need to secure, and this is the personally identifiable information is very sensitive, such as social security numbers, bank account information, and birth dates. And again, our goal is to deploy the employee self-service to all county employees so that it's accessible via the internet and via mobile devices. So again, the implementation strategy is first and foremost, we need to enhance the security, sensitive data, and explore options to enhance the delivered PeopleSoft security. So when we looked at employee self-service, we need to identify the potential risk and develop a mitigation strategy for PeopleSoft, again, for the access via the internet. And we built this secure infrastructure to accommodate the exposure to the internet. And what we've done is we've secured both the front end and back end of the PeopleSoft environment through the online access as well as the database layer. And what we've done is thorough testing on the security portion before we deployed anything, which included actually doing a penetration test and so forth. Okay. And we were primarily introduced to Gray Heller via Google search for securing PeopleSoft. So that's how we partnered up with PeopleSoft. And the solution that Appsian provided on this provided for enhanced security for specific data elements, which I mentioned before, location-based security, so we're aware whether people are accessing data from external or internal. We integrated MultiFactor at the data element level, and we enhanced the logging of data access. And some of these things we found to be very important. For example, like if for some reason somebody's social security number or bank account information gets out there, we want to kind of investigate how did that happen? Was that an intrusion internally? Who's accessing this type of information? How it was accessed, and we could track back and see exactly what happened there. And to secure the database layer, we implemented the Oracle Audit Vault, again, to verify or to confirm any unauthorized access and prevent that. And then this is primarily now we're working with the HR deployment of mobile access, and I'll let Jeff speak a little bit about the setup.
So this is the basic PeopleSoft setup. We have the Oracle database firewall installed in front of the database, so we know who gets in and out access-wise. And then you have the PeopleSoft. We actually have two different app servers. One is for the internal network, and you'll see at the top there, the PeopleSoft app server will go to the internal prod web server, which has the Appsian firewall installed on it. And then that'll go out to county users. On the bottom part is actually, we have a different app server for our mobile access. And then you'll see that goes to external web server on our DMZ, and then county users can access their accounts through the internet and from home or on their mobile devices.
For the initial mobile deployment, we rolled out access to employees' paycheck because people want to see what their paycheck is like, what benefits they have. And so the initial rollout was really kind of read-only type functionality. And for the next rollout, we're looking at allowing employees to do things like address change, name change, update their veterans status, disability status, and so forth. And then subsequent to that, what we're looking at doing, and we're kind of refining to make sure it all works well and tested, is access to employees' timesheets and absence requests, and where managers can go in and approve timesheets and absence management. So that's something that's coming down the road. So that's what we're doing out here in San Joaquin County.
Kaz and Jeff, thank you. That's actually a really interesting process, I think, that could be relevant to many of the attendees, and that is kind of your phasing of the transactions and kind of, starting with the paycheck, which probably gets the most frequent use, and then expanding into transactional access. And it's great to hear that you'll actually open it up to timesheets. Do you think that you'll do multi-factor challenges in those areas as well?
I think we definitely need to consider that. We want to make sure that the right people are doing approvals, entering their time and absence management. So those are kind of things that we really need to evaluate and make sure it's implemented correctly.
And then maybe just a quick insight into how you implemented both Appsian and the multi-factor component, and kind of what was sort of the testing? Was there a control group? Maybe a little bit of information about that.
Well, we do have our test environments here, where so initially we'll do any testing against that with our internal folks, and then we actually expand testing to like our functional areas, include users from those areas, kind of like user acceptance testing, and we move to a broad environment, and then ultimately enable it in production.
In production, and what kind of feedback did you get from your users kind of through that journey, through that process?
I think everybody in the county is actually pretty excited. They felt that going mobile is the way to go, and it's been a long time coming. So just allowing that mobile access, we got a lot of positive comments. We distributed the information that we're going mobile to the entire county, and then we realized that there are some people that actually don't have access to PeopleSoft, and there was a lot of inquiries into getting access and so forth. So so far it's been very positive, and I don't think we've been live since May 30th countywide, and we haven't actually encountered any technical or security, any type of issues, at this point. Again, it is kind of limited, functionality so far. I mean, once people look at benefits, they don't look at it all the time. The paycheck probably gets looked at every 2 weeks because we're in a 2-week pay cycle here.
Sure.
Ultimately, we do go to, things like timesheets and absence management. That's going to get heavier usage. We do have people, people who are, have office or sit in cubicles all day. They'll probably do their timesheets on their workstations, but there are people who work out in the field and don't have access to computers, so they may do that. Or, again, managers will have the ability to approve. They tend to be on the go a lot, so they, approve timesheets and absence requests, from the phone.
That's great. We, as you know, work with a lot of customers, and there's always this initial concern about, well, if we're imposing higher levels of security, is that going to distract from the user experience? But what we also find is that because the bad guys are out there, so publicly and doing so many, there's so many breaches on an everyday basis that we find that employees, even students in our higher ed customers, actually appreciate the heightened level and awareness around security.
Yeah, I think employees actually recognize that. They recognize, if you go mobile, that, again, it can open things up, and they definitely don't want their own personal information stolen, or, again, issues come up all over the place. So I think,
Yep.
You just can't overemphasize the need for security.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kaz and Jeff, thank you very much. And again, everybody, this is Hendrik Spodden. I'm going to turn it over to Greg here in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to do just a really brief company intro. I like to keep the sales rah-rah to a minimum and kind of let our customers do the talking. And so what I thought might be interesting for everybody to see is the success that we've had implementing our security platform in the public sector. And I broke it down into federal, state, county, city, K through 12, and then other. And all of these customers have the same motivation. They want to implement, they want to push PeopleSoft outside their network. Oracle doesn't necessarily provide solutions for them to do that. They want to implement single sign-on. They want to implement really granular logging, which is a key component of our our solution, which Greg will get into. But I think that, I like for our customers to do the talking, and since this is a San Joaquin County and public sector focused webinar, I thought that this might be an interesting view. We've got 200 or more customers now, and these are the public sector. For those of you in California, and this is specific to public sector in California, we have done a lot of work inside the California State University system. This slide indicates the campuses that have licensed our security platform, and for those of you in the public sector California space, it's entirely possible that if you get to the point of licensing from us, that you can use the California State University licensing vehicle that we have in place that was specifically done to allow state agencies, counties, so on and so forth, to license. That's, again, just specific to California, but I know that there's some California agencies on here, and I wanted to speak directly to you about that. Greg, I think that's pretty much it for me. I'm going to make you the presenter, and away you go.
Perfect. Thanks, Hendricks.
You bet.
I'm going to go this route. So one of the things that I wanted to discuss today, because Kaz and team really talked about it, is what they needed to protect and why they wanted to protect it. So one of the things that I wanted to step back and just do a little bit of talking about is kind of setting the stage of when you're looking at implementing and rolling out a project like this, you have to think about data in multiple different ways. So when you look at the bottom of the slide, one of the things that you're going to realize is that I'll talk about employee data and organizational data. So what I wanted to do is kind of set the stage for that beforehand. So when we talk about employee data, what this is really about is this is the employee trusting your organization to protect them and to protect their data, because they are giving you their sensitive information and they expect you to be able to protect that data, make it accessible to them where they can work within their self-service, whether that's on a mobile device or a non-mobile device, but to protect that data in a way that if they make a mistake or if something happens, they're not going to be exposed. They're not going to have their information or a paycheck stolen, anything like that. And then the other side of it is you need to protect the organizational data as well, because when you're thinking about going outside of the firewall or really extending the way your application is being accessed, you want to make sure that that type of interaction is limited and that people are going through the correct security steps to be able to access those back office style functions. And by that, I mean, if somebody's logging in from home, that they're only able to access their self-service without having to go through maybe multi-factor or all sorts of stepped up authentication to get into high privileged transactions, because that's when you end up with a pivot of an attack to where there's a large amount of data that gets exfiltrated out of your organization. So that's one of the things that I like to look at, is the two different forms of data and how you're protecting those. So when we talk about the scenario of, what they went about doing and protecting their data, let's talk about masked data and why you want to start there. I mean, Kaz and the team talked about how they protected not just the outgoing, but also the database level. When you talk about masked data, there's a lot of reason to think about protecting data in this particular format. Why? Is because if you're thinking about self-service, for example, there's a lot of information that may be exposed to somebody if they give up their credentials. Let's say they fall for a phishing attack, give up their user ID and password, and the hacker signs in as them. There's going to be a lot of data exposed to that hacker, whether it's dates of birth, driver's license, passports, address, phone number. All of that type of information is going to be readily accessible to that user, acting as that employee. So this is something that they're going to be able to pivot on. They can then sell that identity on the black market, do something like that. And also in a worst case scenario, maybe they pivot and they steal a paycheck through the diversion, where they update the account number. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can protect that data. And when you look at masking of data specifically, it's one of the scenarios that I like to talk about, because when you're thinking about implementing multi-factor authentication and some of these other initiatives, for example, if you're masking out the data, you can give access to additional functionality without having to maybe go through a multi-factor authentication. You know, Kaz talked about it from an implementation perspective and how frequently they expect some of these people to be on and off of the application. Some transactions they may use every 2 weeks. Payroll, for example. You know, benefits you do once a year. You know, so it's not something that the employees are used to. So when you're talking about interacting with the system, it's one of those scenarios that you want to make sure it's simplistic and it's easy for them to do, and you're not making it more difficult. As Hendrik said, it's integrating security with usability to still protect your application and your data and how the employees are interacting with that data set. So masked data can really help with that, because it can alleviate some of the pressures to implement maybe some technologies that your team may or may not be ready for. Some organizations are very specific. They've mandated you have to do multi-factor authentication when you're accessing any sort of system with private sensitive information. That's great. It's outstanding. So that's the next step. But not every organization, especially when you think about how PeopleSoft gets implemented, is ready for that day one. As Kaz and the team said earlier too, they were now reaching out to a group of employees that had never had access before. So now, if they're not working with it on a daily basis, the usability of that becomes a bigger feature. You know, you still need to securely do it, but you're talking about people who aren't on a computer every day. So how are you going to securely roll that out in a manner that they can interact with the system and it's going to make sense, you can protect it, and yet still allow them to do the functions that they need to do. So masking of data can be very, very important with that. Going a step further is least privileged access. Least privileged, to explain the concept, is really about controlling what somebody can do when they're coming in from an untrusted location. I might define an untrusted location a little bit differently than some organizations do. I know some are trying to get into, you know, geo filtering of if somebody's coming from this country or that country and I don't trust them, or any of those type of situations. I'm not necessarily looking at it like by a country perspective. I look at it from the perspective of, if you're not on my network, I don't trust you. You're really external to my organization because you're outside of my controls at that particular situation. I can't control what's on your computer, what's being done. I don't know if somebody's VPNing, faking IP addresses, doing all sorts of things like that. So if you're not on my network, I want to make sure that you're only going to be able to gain access to the transactions that I deem as an organization that you should be able to access. You know, maybe that's 5 or 10 transactions. Maybe they fluctuate throughout the year, those type of scenarios. But least privileged, the main important part of least privilege that you're really getting into is the fact that you are stopping the pivot to a high privilege transaction. That's where your organization can get into real trouble. By that, I mean some user, maybe let's go back to the phishing attack. They'll get a hold of a credential. They sign in as that user. Maybe they see that they've only got self-service access. Great. Well, they go to the next account that fell for this phishing attack. This particular person happens to be the benefits admin. Now, all of a sudden, they're logging in remotely, and when they log into the system, they not only see that they have access to this person's self-service information, but they also have access to the benefits administration, and they have access to query. They have access to maybe payroll information. Now that whole attack vector has changed drastically. So now you can have data. Somebody can run a query. They can, you know, save that query to their computer. You could have hundreds of thousands of rows or tens of thousands of rows exfiltrated out of your organization very, very quickly because of not enforcing a least privilege style access. You know, and it goes for technical people as well as functional people. You know, your PeopleSoft admins, for example, a lot of times they have God level accounts that are inside of the PeopleSoft system. You want to make sure that they are, you know, controlled in a way to where when they're logging in from home, they don't have that style of access either. So, you know, least privileged access is very important. When we get into talking about multi-factor authentication, there's a few things that I kind of wanted to touch base on here. Really, multi-factor authentication is a fabulous tool to insert stepped-up authentication into a transactional process. There's multiple different ways that you can do that. One of the things that we facilitate is we allow you to bring that into that transactional level. So talking about bringing it into a menu or a component down to a page level or even a field level transaction if we want to, where somebody has to pass that multi-factor authentication to be able to see that event. The interesting part about that is from the implementation perspective is it allows you to keep in mind your end users. We work with a lot of customers on a daily basis with either very successful, or past failed multi-factor rollouts. The hardest problem with multi-factor is some of the points that Kaz hit. You're talking about touching people who don't work on a computer on a daily basis. It's not something they're used to. They're not working with these applications. And now all of a sudden you're going to inject a new process that they're going to have to deal with. You might have to inject a multi-factor authentication into that process as well. And it sometimes can make it very difficult for them to be able to access the application. So when I look back and think about a lot of the successful multi-factor implementations that have been done, they really take into effect how that end user is interacting with the application. What are they doing? What kind of skill sets do they have? When and should we provide an MFA challenge? When should they have to go through that? And that's where if you look at some of the other protections like masked data and least privileged and implementing those, you can cut down on the amount of multi-factor that you have to, force a user to go through. And then they only have to go through that process when they really are doing a secure transaction. Makes it a lot easier for them to interact with the system, cuts down on support costs as well, and also implementation costs. A lot of times your MFA integration may be cost-based by phone calls or push notifications or even, text messages that are going out, depending upon what type of MFA you're dealing with. So all of those have a cost matrix to them. So when you can limit, how frequently you're having to do an MFA based upon layering in your protections together, then it can really be a win-win for both sides of the organization. So I always recommend think about multi-factor from the end client's perspective and where it should be injected and how you should do that in your MFA implementation is going to be far more successful. Pivoting to single sign-on. These days, single sign-on is becoming almost a de facto standard when you're talking about employees working with enterprise-level applications or, really applications inside of their organization at all, whether they're, enterprise-level or just one-off style applications. One, it becomes easier because the users can authenticate to a single source, and that single source is normally an identity provider that's what it does. It's a very robust, user ID password management system to where you can have all sorts of rules in effect of, passwords, whether it's special characters, non-special characters, all of those type of things. When you look at ERP apps, not a lot of them have been built with that type of password management system inside of it. So enabling a single sign-on solution can often work with your end users, especially when you're trying to push out functionality for the first time that facilitates them being able to maneuver in and out of an application. It cuts down on the number of user IDs and passwords that they have to remember, which in turn is going to cut down on the number of ones that are written underneath the keyboard, if you want to go back to that, or the Post-it note that's sitting on the monitor, because they have so many to remember. I look back when I was an enterprise architect, and I know at one particular point in time, I probably had in the range of 150 different IDs and passwords that I had to remember for different systems. That's a lot. Granted, being an architect, you get a lot more. So, but it still bodes to the fact of, those are individual passwords and all those individual systems. And if I can facilitate a way to tie into an identity provider and have that enterprise single sign-on pushed into my PeopleSoft system and trust that authentication, it just makes it a lot easier to manage my users, especially when you're talking about rolling out and providing that type of functionality for the very first time. And that's one of the reasons why, if you look back at some of the customer lists that Hendrix was showing there, that's a big touch point that we're really seeing from an integration, is bringing that single sign-on into effect, because it not only improves communication inside of an organization, it improves collaboration, they'll work together better, they share information better, and it just makes the employee workforce happier moving forward. So single sign-on has a lot of pros and cons to it. We see it a lot from an implementation perspective right now. So, going back to thinking about how you protect that employee data and that organizational data as you're taking in some of those effects and applying those security models and layers really to your PeopleSoft system, you need to be able to choose and customize how you do that. So what I want to do
Greg,
is talk a little. Go ahead.
Greg, before I thought I'd go ahead and interrupt. There are several questions that I think go straight to the things that you were just talking about, and I'll kind of take them in reverse order. In terms of single sign-on, do our customers see a reduction, like in help desk activity, password resets?
Yes, when you're talking about implementing, self-service or single sign-on like that, it really does cut down on the amount of password resets, because the user ID, the user has to exist in the PeopleSoft system, but it's not validating against that particular password. It uses the password authentication mechanism of the identity provider. So your help desk or your support team doesn't have to go in and update or change passwords in case somebody actually falls for a phishing attack. Makes that whole process much easier and faster to resolve, because they can change the password in one location and all of your PeopleSoft systems would then not be accessible unless they had that new password to the IDP.
For sure, and that obviously drives to cost savings and also user satisfaction. The other question that I have, and we get this a lot generally, not just on the webinar, is around multi-factor authentication. And the question is, well, if we impose a multi-factor challenge at the front door, doesn't that pretty well protect our PeopleSoft system?
Yes. So multi-factor at the front door is, it's an interesting solution. It's not necessarily what I would call the best. It is an option. Many of the horror stories that we have heard deal with an MFA at the front door just because of the integration, how the end users are interacting with the system, support of it. If they don't have their token, then they can't get into the system. And really what it does is it puts a step in the way automatically, maybe depending upon whether, if you think about the transaction that somebody's working with, it doesn't take any effect into what they're doing inside of the application. I've seen internal threats, for example, that once somebody has passed the MFA at SignOn, for example, that user may be in the system for 6 to 8, 10 hours a day. At that particular point, if they're not locking their keyboard, they're not locking up their system, that's a problem that somebody can come in. Additionally, one of the problems with MFA at the front door that I think is probably the biggest issue to deal with is the fact of when you look at most of your high-profile accounts inside of PeopleSoft. Take your PeopleSoft admin, your DBAs, your report, anything that's using a 2-tier PeopleSoft account that isn't set up in the identity provider or set up to where it could easily provide the MFA, doesn't have the MFA. So some of your highest privileged accounts in that scenario aren't going to go through a multi-factor challenge. So that's one of my biggest complaints with just at the front door, depending upon how a lot of people do it, is the accounts that are really needing the MFA aren't going to get it because they're coming in a back door that's really authenticating a different way in a lot of scenarios.
Well, and I know that probably everybody in the audience today understands that the bad guys know PeopleSoft really, really well. They're probing all the time out on the internet, and so you can be sure that the keys to the kingdom they understand are high privileged users. And then the final question, Greg, and I apologize for such a long interruption. What does Appsian recommend in terms of protecting non-production environments?
That's a great question. From a non-production and this is just kind of going back to what I've seen from an implementation perspective and dealing with different customers through security reviews. PeopleSoft customers have a tendency to take a full copy of production and put it into their development stack, dev, test, stage, QA, whatever your organization happens to call that. And because that's a full copy of production, if you think about the new privacy laws, GDPR, the California initiative that's going on, these are privacy laws that aren't going away. When you have a full copy of production inside of your development systems, you really need to protect that data within that system just as much as you do a production instance, because we've heard from customers and non-customers and security reviews and just talking to people at conferences of, data being shared on social media. Well, they didn't know where it was leaked from, who looked at it. Often not, that's people accessing that data out of a development system because they know it's a full copy of production. They know auditing is turned down. People aren't looking at it. If something happens to the system, they'll just refresh from production again and off they go. So that's where a lot of data, especially internally, is looked at because it's not tracked. It's not thought about the same way as that production data set. So it's getting people to change that mindset of, yes, I have production and data in my dev systems. I need to protect it the same way. So many of our customers have many different protections inside of the development stack than they do production, because people end up with very broad-based security roles that allow them much more access inside of those systems than they do in a production instance.
Thank you.
Perfect. Great questions. So when we boil back and talk about the application security platform a little bit, what we've done is we've really designed it to bring those enterprise initiatives into the PeopleSoft system. So when you talk about intrusion prevention, this is where we're integrating with those multi-factor, with single sign-on, enforcing the least privileged access. So this is where it's allowing you to set up how you want people to interact and what you want them to be able to do inside of your PeopleSoft system when they're coming in remotely. What security steps should they have to go through? The nice part about our platform is it's configuration, not customization. So when we talk about all of these integration points, you're not having to worry about, this is something I have to manage moving forward, from an update perspective. When we talk about the data loss, this is allowing you to configure how you want your sensitive data to be accessed. Should it be masked? Where should it be masked? When should it be masked? Who should it be masked for? What type of mask format? Partial, full, which fields? You can define whatever your sensitive data is. That's the nice part about it. I've seen everything from driver's license, phone numbers, addresses, dates of birth, social security numbers, national IDs, passport numbers, anything that your company has defined as sensitive data can easily be then set up to mask and protect and choose how you want somebody to interact with that data. From an incident response perspective, this is where we're coming in and giving you the details about what's happening in your PeopleSoft system. It helps with detection and forensics of a breach because we're able to give you that insight as to what pages those users are on, what they're actually accessing, what are they using, what helps for compliance and audit support. So when we're talking about the California Privacy Act, what's happening? What's being, accessed? Who's being looked at? I can start to answer these questions in a way that's very clear and forthcoming. The nice part about the platform is, as powerful as it is, it's extremely configurable. So it's not a one size fits all. So the very important part of this is, as an end user is accessing it, maybe depending upon what role they have. So if I have a self-service user, I'm going to have one security profile or multiple security profiles, really. I want them to go through these steps. I want a high privileged user to go through these steps. I want a PeopleSoft administrator to go through these steps. I'm going to log each one of these people differently. They're going to see masked data differently. I'm going to mask different sets of data for them, all based upon maybe who, what, when, where they're coming from, those type of things. So it's really configurable and customizable to fit each and every one's security goals, because not everybody has the same goals. Everybody defines data differently. Everybody is going to roll out transactions differently. And that's one of the things with as many implementations that I've done over the last 5 years. None of them are, they're similar, but they're all unique in their own way. And that's the part that's great about the platform, is it's configuration, not customization. So it lends itself very easy to a phased rollout to protecting your application and your data in the format that your organization needs it protected. So I'm going to quickly jump in and do a quick demo of some of the protections that we're talking about. So what I wanted to do, I've got an HCM 9.2 system, so I'm going to log in as a self-service style user, and I can't type my password correctly, so let me do that again real quick.
Maybe you need single sign-on, Greg.
Maybe I do. So I wouldn't have that problem. So one of the things that we just jumped into is we're going to drop into the fluid self-service pages. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the personal details, going through some of the scenarios, what we talked about earlier. A hacker's going to make a decision in roughly 20 to 30 seconds of if they're going to keep this account. So they may log in and they're going to see, one, can I steal this person's identity? Can I steal this person's paycheck? And two or three, is this a high privileged account to where I can pivot to, say, query or payroll or benefits, something like that. So they're going to come in, and if I'm looking at Vicky's information, this is where you're going to notice the social security number, national ID is masked out. This is through our platform, so it's entirely configurable. There is no customization to the page. You can pick and choose what fields you want to do. I kind of gave the list earlier, so I'm not going to go back through them, but social security numbers, dates of birth, since this happens to be on that page, you can pick and choose the information you want to mask. Also, you can utilize attributes. So maybe I want to mask that data only when they're off of my network, but when they're on my network, I want them to be able to validate or see that information. That way I can make a choice on that and allow the user to validate, confirm, just in case, it does happen that, addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, social security numbers, sometimes those fields get entered incorrectly when somebody's doing the data entry. So I can have that information validated when they're on my network in my trusted location. One of the scenarios that we find a lot of is the direct deposit diversion. And what happens in this, just to give you a little history of the attack, is somebody's going to do a very targeted phishing attack normally. They get several identities, they log in, they update the account number. Just before payroll, as payroll runs, that paycheck is then paid to an overseas account, and that money is lost. There have been thousands of organizations that have really been hit with this. Some of them have been hit for significant amount of money. So what we have done to protect this is we're actually enabling a couple of different parts of our technology. The intrusion prevention and the data loss, we're layering those together to implement a real-time multi-factor challenge based upon a field inside of this page. So if the user is coming to this page, maybe they have 3 or 4 accounts. They could have a checking, savings, college fund, and they just want to verify how much is going to each account. If that's all that end user is doing, they don't really need to pass a multi-factor, because they aren't doing anything. They're just viewing it, verifying that the information is correct. I don't have to go through that challenge to access that page. So from a usability perspective, this very targeted MFA enables that. If they want to go through and update the account number, that's when they need to pass the multi-factor challenge. So from that hack's perspective, we can put that stop in place because the hacker can't get in and update the account number. If the user wants to, I happen to have this system configured with Duo, so I'm going to do a push notification. I'm going to go ahead and grab my phone and bring it over here so you guys can see it real quick. I get the request of that push notification, and I can either do an approve or deny. So I'm going to go ahead and approve that. And in the back end, what you're going to see is I've now got access to the account number. I can move forward. I can make those changes. So very targeted MFA, implemented in the transaction when it needs to be implemented, not broad-based shotgun style effect. So what I want to do is I'm going to sign out and come in as a high privileged user real quick. Because when we talk about tracking sensitive information and what's happening is I want to treat my self-service users very different than my high privileged users. So I'm going to go to Workforce Administration, Biographical, Modify a Person, and I'm going to open up a data record. What you're going to notice on this page is rather than more of a static mask of what you saw on those fluid pages, this is what we call our click to view. So we have replaced the information on the page with a partial mask in this scenario. A lot of times it's a complete mask, but it's a partial mask of the implement data, and it's just a hyperlink. So if I want to see the data, I can just click on it and the data is going to be exposed. there's a couple of things that have happened from a business process flow here. So let's think about the privacy laws. If I have somebody accessing this page, what's going to occur is they're accessing it. All of that sensitive information is exposed to them by default. So now from, different privacy laws that are coming into effect, I have to track each and every view of this page. Whether somebody updated information or did anything, that doesn't matter. I have to understand every view or every touch because that data is exposed. It's there. So by removing that data by default and implementing a click to view, we can now go in and basically test for and report on the positives. So when the user clicked that link, that's exactly what happened, or exactly what occurred was we logged that information as well as we exposed it. So I'm going to come over here to our analytics and dashboards, and I'm going to open up, I'm in our security analytics platform, and I'm going to open up and look at our PPI views. What this allows me to do is track and have an understanding of that data being exposed. I can track that by different users. So I was acting as PS1, who I was signed in as. And what you're going to see in this scenario is I exposed that data. Here's my IP address, the user, who I accessed, where I came in from, Fort Worth, and what page I happen to view that information on. So I can close that loop from these privacy laws to really understand exactly who and what was viewed, which gives me the ability from audits and those type of scenarios. It also allows me to track individual users. So maybe I have 10 or 15 clerks that are accessing information like that. Maybe I've got 1 or 2 of them that are viewing 3 to 4 times the amount of sensitive information that everybody else is. Why is that? Is there a business case for that? Maybe I need to retrain them to take that information out of their normal process flow, which is what a lot of organizations are doing now. When I think about it from IP addresses, incident response wise, sometimes when I had to do that, all I would get was an IP address and a date time range and tell me what was done. So viewing data by who's accessed sensitive information by a particular IP address can really help in that scenario as well. One of the things that we're starting to see a little bit more of is, on top of that, is offboarding. So as an organization, now when somebody puts in their 2-week notice and they're leaving your organization, what did they touch? What did they view? Close that loop as to, are they stealing anything from any of my systems, whether that be private data or, data that's important to the organization as a whole. So it allows you to understand exactly what they did the last week or so before they left the organization, or maybe even put in their notice. I mean, really, you can do it on all time, but a lot of times organizations are looking at that finite window of what have you done in the last month now as you're putting in your notice? What have you looked at? What have you touched? What have you changed? And then from a privacy law, GDPR, the California Privacy Act, really being able to understand who's viewed individual IDs. So in this situation, we can let you know who has accessed information based upon that particular IP, or not IP, but that user. This isn't the user who's accessing the system. This is whose data was viewed. So it's a different spin on that. And then also a geograph of where that data has been accessed from. One of the things that I wanted to show you too is just from a reporting or alerting perspective, the KU001 ID happens to be an executive inside of the demo system. So I want to be alerted when somebody accesses any sort of sensitive information of an executive. Why? Why are they looking at that record? What are they doing with the record? Are they looking at things that they shouldn't be accessing? Those type of scenarios. Ironically enough, when I put in my failed my user ID and password earlier, I also get an alert about that. Why? Because I want to know when people are trying to log into the system and failing. One of the things that I noticed years ago when I first did a rollout and I started logging information utilizing this platform is my PeopleSoft system. There were numerous attempted logins as not only PS, but VP1. So basically it were scripts that were running against my system out on the internet that were attempting to log in as PS, and VP1. Why? Because a lot of times those are default credentials and people don't change them, or they forget to change them, or they forget to inactivate those accounts, and people are attempting to log in as those accounts. Because why? It's easy. You can script that. You can find it. You look for the PeopleSoft login page, put in PSPS, hit enter, and see what happens. If you get in, great. If you don't, okay, fine, go on to the next one. Why? Because it happens. That's why people are doing it. But a lot of times, from an understanding of failed user IDs and passwords, that doesn't always get back to somebody on a PeopleSoft side who understands what that ID actually really means. So when I started seeing that and was able to capture those logs, it was really kind of unique, and I gained a lot of insight as to what was really happening against my system on the internet.
Greg, there are a couple of questions I'd like to insert. One question, and I'll just read it. In that example, can you, and this is going back a few minutes, in that example, can you protect the calculated fields as well, for, in this case, the age and years and months, or only the database fields?
We can actually protect both. I quickly did this and put it together, and then looked and was like, I probably should have done those other fields as well. We can do any of the fields on the page. What you'll find a lot of times is, even as this is like a partial value, a lot of times from an implementation perspective, what you're going to get is sensitive data removed, or click to view data. You don't even get like a partial amount of the data. It really comes down to how you want to implement it and how you want your users to interact with it. But yes, we can do both the calculated and the database level fields. Good question.
Great. Thank you. And then the next question, and this was inserted while you were doing the analytics component. Is this tool provided by Appsian? So I think, Greg, probably some insight into, our Splunk basis and working with other SIMs and so on and so forth would be good.
Yes, definitely. So when we talk about the analytics that we provide, we can offer you a turnkey solution with the analytics. We happen to be utilizing Splunk to do that. It's something that a lot of our customers are using. And it's also something that we could get up and running, really easily. It's a very powerful platform. From integrations with other security information and event management systems, SIMs, I have not found one that we have not been able to work with. We've pushed information into just about every single one of them when you're talking about the broad customer base that we have worked with. Different organizations, maybe financials, have different fraud protection systems that they want us to push data to, for example. So it's very simplistic from that perspective. The way our logs are actually generated is they're written out to the web server, and they can be picked up at that particular point, which is one of the reasons why it facilitates integrating with any sort of endpoint. What we have done is to allow you to jumpstart and provide you with a solution is provide our analytics platform that we did build on Splunk, like I said. But what we've done is we've enriched the data. So we're capturing our data, we're enriching it, we're adding in context to all of that information, and then giving you a head start. So for example, if I were to go back to the dashboards up here, one of the things that we've done is make it to where people don't necessarily have to understand PeopleSoft to understand what was going on against your PeopleSoft system. When you're talking about looking at PII, for example, PII is private information. It doesn't matter, but rather than somebody accessing a specific page, well, we know that page has private information on it. This is the failed login. So, for example, when I happen to just get that alert, it's under a possible brute force attack. Why? Because we've had some customers and non-customers deal with brute force attacks against their PeopleSoft system. So what IP addresses are somebody trying to log into is a quick way to try to grab that. If I go back to, as a whole, we deliver reports and dashboards around security, user engagement, and then also performance. All of them have different end users in mind. Performance is really more for probably the PeopleSoft admin to give you information about how long transactions are taking, to help troubleshoot that entire process. The user engagement is more about, more for like a business manager or owner, to understand what transactions are being touched, who's doing what. And then the security side is obviously more for incident response, private data, analytics about the different GDPR, those type things, to where it's more of pulling out and providing those security matrix to somebody who doesn't have that PeopleSoft knowledge. That way you don't have to try to get your person who's running your SIM or your analytics platform to understand what data you're sending them. We're already doing that and enriching that data up front.
Thanks, Greg. A follow-on question: does Appsian provide, consulting or, pre-configured type analytic reporting and alerting?
Yes, we do, and that's actually all done through our statement of work. So when we're implementing the product with you, our team will go through a statement of work, and all of that can be defined and set up as part of that work.
Great, thank you. And then another question that always gets asked is, what type of performance hit do my PeopleSoft servers take with the implementation of the security platform?
That's a great question. The security platform as a whole is designed as a plugin into the PeopleSoft system, so it sits inside of the web servers. When you look at a lot of the conditions or the situations, if I flip back over to PeopleSoft, for example, we inspect the metadata as this page is being served up, and we find that field. Well, we utilize PeopleSoft attributes. We use roles, user IDs, for example, menus, components, pages. All of those things are known to the PeopleSoft web server. So from a performance perspective, those are our first things that are looked at. That's where we're going to start. So when a security action gets defined, we're one of the things we may look at and say, well, if somebody goes to job data, for example, well, when they're not on job data, that rule's not going to fire. So as soon as we know that component's not job data, we're never looking at anything underneath there. So the rules get dropped off very quickly based upon in-memory events. Giving it a range of performance, I would probably say 1 to 3, 4, 5% of your web server. We've never had anybody have to add additional hardware to support our application security platform. It's something we're very proud of. When we talk about some of our large implementations, our largest is probably 350,000 users. And when they went through a very stringent load test, their admins came back that it was within the margin of error of their normal PeopleSoft install. We've got some university customers that are over 100,000 users as well. Same type scenario from them as well. So it's something that we definitely push on our internal testing to make sure that we're not impacting PeopleSoft performance. It's also one of the reasons why on the analytics side, we have injected the performance reports, because we want to help solve those problems, to answer that question of when that user calls in and says, well, it's really slow for me today. Okay, well, why? Is it really slow, or is it acting normal for him and he's, or for them, and they're just really complaining or something this morning? Well, when you have that data and you have the information on that, you can then respond smarter and better and help resolve the issue better.
Thanks, Greg. And then a follow-on question, which probably is a good closing question since we are just a couple of minutes from the top of the hour. How long does this thing take to implement? Sort of what's the level of effort? Can you give us some insight into that?
Yes, definitely. Level of effort, a lot of times we deal with and work with the PeopleSoft admins. When we talk about a range of time, I like to give 30 to 45 days as a standard implementation. We can obviously move much faster than that. The fastest implementation I've ever done personally was 3 days from install to production. A lot of times I give 30 to 45 days because we will work within your change control processes. And as we kind of talked about a little bit earlier with that statement of work, so we are going to define what you want to accomplish inside of this project. Sometimes it may be phased, sometimes it's not. Everything's going to be done in the first go. That's fine. Everything that you saw delivered in the demo today is delivered day one. So it allows you to jumpstart and move very quickly to protect your PeopleSoft systems. And that's one of the reasons why we can do it within that time frame. Often not that 30 to 45 days is really to meet your change control processes, because my organizations that I worked with in the past, we had to stay in. Once we were in test, we could move to, or once we were in dev, we could move to test, but it had to stay in test for a week. It had to stay in QA for 2 weeks, and those type processes. So that's one of the reasons why I give the 30 to 45 day window, because of fitting within your organization normal process flow.
Great. Thank you, Greg. And we are at the top of the hour. I would like to thank everybody for their time today. Hopefully this proved valuable. I would especially like to thank our customer, San Joaquin County, for participating with us today, also for selecting and implementing the Appsian product. Anybody that attended today, if you have questions, please email us at info@appsian.com, and we'll make this recording available to everybody and send you the link. Thanks very much. Have a great rest of the week and have a very wonderful and safe 4th of July holiday.